New Year's Eve of 2025 brought an unusual energy to Times Square. The air buzzed with anticipation, millions of voices blending into an unrelenting roar. Tom, a seasoned paramedic, sat in his ambulance on the fringes of the chaos, sipping lukewarm coffee as the crowd surged in celebration. His team was ready for the usual: overdoses, falls, and the occasional brawl. But this year, the emergencies carried an unsettling edge. By 9 p.m., the first call came in. A woman in her late 30s had collapsed. When Tom arrived, she was unresponsive, though her vitals were stable. Bystanders mumbled incoherently about a light hovering above her just before she dropped. He brushed off their accounts, chalking it up to New Year's excitement or intoxication. But by midnight, the reports flooded in. People were falling unconscious without warning. Despite normal heart rates and breathing patterns, they wouldn't wake. And always, someone mentioned glowing orbs lingering near the victims. Tom worked through the chaos, moving from one call to the next. His medical training fought against the absurdity of the situation. Each victim was the same: unconscious but unharmed, untouched by drugs, alcohol, or any apparent injury. Toxicology tests were clean, and preliminary screenings showed no pathogens. It was as though the victims had simply paused. "What about the orbs?" his colleague muttered between calls, his voice trembling. "People keep saying they see something. Lights." Tom scoffed. "Hallucinations, stress, the crowd. That's all it is." Yet, as the night wore on, Tom couldn't ignore the consistency of the descriptions. A soft, glowing sphere, the size of a basketball, pulsating faintly before vanishing into the air. By 4 a.m., Tom returned to his Queens apartment, his body heavy with exhaustion. Dropping his gear by the door, he sank onto the couch, closing his eyes. The glow of the streetlights outside cast faint patterns on the walls, but when he opened his eyes, he saw something that didn't belong: a faint light hovering near the ceiling. The orb pulsed gently, its light neither harsh nor inviting. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He rubbed his eyes, convinced the exhaustion was playing tricks on him, but the orb persisted, descending slowly until it hovered just above eye level. What the hell are you?" he whispered, inching closer. The orb didn't react to his voice, but when he stepped forward, it moved toward him, its light intensifying. A low hum filled the room, resonating not in his ears, but deep within his chest. Suddenly, memories flooded his mind. His childhood laughter echoing through a sunlit yard, the tears he'd shed at his mother's funeral, the sterile beeps of an ICU monitor during his father's last moments. Each memory felt vivid, immediate, as if he were reliving them. Tom tried to back away, but his body refused to respond. Panic set in as the orb seemed to probe deeper, pulling emotions from him like threads unraveling a tapestry. The hum grew louder, almost unbearable, and the light flared so brightly that his vision blurred. With every ounce of willpower, he tore his gaze from the orb, stumbling backward. As if startled, the orb recoiled, its glow dimming before it darted through the wall and disappeared. Tom stood frozen in his living room, his heart pounding. Pulling out his phone, he reviewed the footage he'd managed to capture. The orb was there, faint but undeniable, floating like a phantom. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The witnesses, the victims, the accounts of glowing lights. They were real. Over the next few days, Tom's body began to betray him. He experienced sudden blackouts, vivid nightmares, and a constant sense of being watched. Doctors found nothing wrong. He spent sleepless nights scouring the internet, discovering reports of similar phenomena, glowing orbs appearing before unexplained collapses. Theories ranged from extraterrestrial surveillance to advanced psychological experiments. None provided answers. He joined forums, connected with others who'd encountered the orbs, and discovered a disturbing pattern. The orbs targeted individuals with heightened emotional trauma or unresolved memories, exploiting their vulnerabilities for unknown purposes. One user suggested they were conducting experiments, mining human consciousness like data from a hard drive. Despite his deteriorating health, Tom resolved to uncover the truth. He began documenting his experiences and symptoms, sharing his story online to warn others. His efforts drew attention from skeptics and believers alike, But Tom didn't care. He knew what he'd seen. As the new year unfolded, reports of orb sightings surged. Videos and eyewitness accounts painted a chilling picture of their spread. Tom continued his work, even as his own body and mind seemed to wither under the weight of his encounter. What frightened him most wasn't the orbs or their invasive presence. It was the growing realization that their purpose was far from random. The orbs weren't just studying humans, they were choosing them. And somewhere in the night, in the uncharted depths of the city and beyond, the lights continued to glow, silently expanding their reach. Tom's world narrowed into a singular obsession: understanding the orbs. He spent hours combing through obscure articles, diving into the deepest corners of the internet. Patterns began to emerge. The orbs were not only targeting the emotionally vulnerable, but also those who had experienced intense trauma, people who harbored unspoken guilt, grief, or anger. The orbs weren't just passive observers. They seemed to thrive on human emotion, feeding on memories and leaving a trail of psychological devastation. One night, while browsing a private forum for experiencers, Tom stumbled upon a post that chilled him to his core. The user described their encounter in detail, eerily mirroring Tom's own. The orb had invaded their memories, leaving them weak and fragmented. But what stood out was the aftermath. The user claimed their memories were fading, whole parts of their life slipping into a fog. Their last message read, "They're taking more than we think. Be careful what you let them see." Tom felt the weight of those words settle over him. Over the past few days, he'd noticed lapses in his memory, names he couldn't recall, moments from his childhood that felt distant and blurred. Was he losing himself piece by piece? Desperate for answers, Tom organized a video call with several other survivors. The group was small, 5 people from different parts of the world, but their experiences aligned too closely to dismiss. As they shared their stories, a picture of the orb's behavior began to take shape. "They appear after something big," said Layla, a journalist from France. "A tragedy, an upheaval. It's like they're drawn to the energy of it." "But why us?" asked Miguel, a former soldier from Brazil. "Why pick us out of everyone else?" "I think it's because we're fractured," Tom said quietly. He hesitated, then continued, "They use our memories. Maybe they're searching for something specific, or maybe they just feed off of them." Layla frowned. "If that's true, then what happens when they're done with us?" No one had an answer. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that his time was running out. The gaps in his memory were growing, his blackouts more frequent. Determined to confront the orb again, he devised a plan. If they were feeding on his memories, he would try to disrupt the process, recording everything, grounding himself in the present, leaving no corner of his mind vulnerable. He set up cameras around his apartment, each linked to a live feed on his laptop. Every moment of his life would be documented. And then he waited. For 2 nights, nothing happened. The cameras recorded only silence and the rhythmic hum of his breathing. But on the 3rd night, the orb returned. It appeared without warning, materializing in the center of his living room. This time, its glow was brighter, its hum deeper and more resonant. Tom felt the pressure in his chest again, the vibrations crawling through his bones. But he was ready. "I know you're here," he said aloud, his voice shaking. "What do you want?" The orb floated closer, its light pulsating in response. Tom's mind began to fracture under the onslaught of memories. His wife leaving, the unshakable guilt from losing a patient, the suffocating loneliness of his apartment. He clung to his plan, forcing himself to focus on the present. "I won't let you take more," he growled, his fists clenched. The orb seemed to hesitate. Its hum faltered, and its light flickered as though struggling. Tom's camera feeds showed it clearly, a pulsating, otherworldly presence, its movements erratic and disjointed. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the orb shot upward, disappearing into the ceiling. Tom collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. When he reviewed the footage, he realized something chilling. The orb had interacted with the cameras, distorting the feed. Parts of the video were corrupted, the light from the orb bleeding into every frame like an infection. The next morning, Tom woke to find a USB drive on his kitchen table. He hadn't put it there. His hands trembled as he plugged it into his laptop. The drive contained a single file, a video labeled Observation. The footage was grainy, but it showed Tom's apartment, his cameras, his movements, the orb. But this wasn't from his perspective. It was as though the orb itself had recorded the footage, its light casting everything in an unnatural hue. The video ended abruptly, but not before showing something that sent shivers down Tom's spine. Himself, frozen and unresponsive, as the orb hovered inches from his head. His eyes were vacant, his expression slack. The file time-stamped the footage as occurring during one of his blackouts. Tom realized the orbs weren't just observing. They were testing boundaries, experimenting with control. The USB drive was a warning, or a taunt. Either way, it confirmed what he'd feared. The orbs had no intention of leaving him alone. Now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about fighting back. Armed with the corrupted footage, Tom reached out to investigative journalists, paranormal researchers, and even government officials. He started a movement, encouraging others to document their experiences and share their stories. Slowly, the world began to pay attention, but the orbs were watching too. Tom felt their presence more often, their light flickering at the edges of his vision. They were studying him, adapting, and as their sightings spread across the globe, Tom knew one thing for certain: humanity was no longer alone. And the question that haunted him most was no longer why me, but what's next?